very erotic scene, and
well, it's not. That's very funny because it's on the train. Too much testosterone for one girl.
Right.
I was over, so I kept to myself, but I was definitely pinching myself.
At 61, Diane Lane carries her history with quiet elegance. The camera still loves her. The audience still trusts her. But behind the luminous performances, from A Little Romance to her Oscar-nominated turn in Unfaithful, there is a private story rarely told in full. What happens to the loves that shape you, but don't stay? Over 4 decades in Hollywood, Diane Lane shared her life with men who were rising legends, global icons, passionate rebels, and unexpected first loves. Some relationships unfolded publicly. Others lived in whispers. Some ended gently. Others tested her strength in ways she has only hinted at in interviews. And now, looking back, the truth feels more human than glamorous. Because number 6, the one few expected, wasn't about scandal or heartbreak. It was about youth. And sometimes, youth is the love we never truly get over. Chapter 1. Christopher Lambert. When Diane Lane met Christopher Lambert, she was still in the fragile glow of her early 20s. It began in 1984 to 85, during separate publicity tours for the Cotton Club in Paris and Rome. She was 19, already a seasoned Hollywood face, yet craving something real and expansive. He was French, enigmatic, with an international allure from films like Greystoke and Subway. Their connection sparked quickly. First a brief romance, then a pause, then a deeper reunion in Rome in 1986 while filming Priceless Beauty together. Lane later spoke of falling in love with a sense of adventure, stepping into a wider world through quiet moments and shared creativity. They married in October 1988 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. At 23, Diane welcomed their daughter, Eleanor Jasmine Lambert, in 1993. Motherhood arriving as a profound shift amid her rising career. But distance proved more than romantic. Lambert's work spanned continents. Lane's roots stayed in Hollywood. Long separations eroded the passion, replaced by the realities of 2 demanding careers and young parenthood. By March 1994, the marriage ended quietly. No scandals, no bitterness. Lane has always spoken respectfully of Lambert, highlighting grateful co-parenting and the lessons learned. Beneath her composed reflections lies the tender ache of an early great love, idealistic, transformative, and unfinished. The first deep romance often isn't meant to endure forever, but it imprints on everything that follows, teaching devotion, independence, and the beauty of leaping even when the story doesn't last. For Diane Lane, Christopher Lambert was the doorway to adulthood, romantic, atmospheric, and ultimately a gentle teacher in letting go. Chapter 2. Matt Dillon. By the early 1980s, Diane Lane was no longer the wide-eyed newcomer. She had already faced the sting of Hollywood's cruelty after the Cotton Club faltered, and critics unfairly questioned her rise. Then came Matt Dillon, young, magnetic, and every bit the rebel heartthrob of his generation. They met during the Outsiders era, moving within the same tight-knit circle of rising stars under Francis Ford Coppola. In interviews years later, Diane described that time as intoxicating. Youth, ambition, and possibility all wrapped into one. Matt was intense, serious about craft, yet emotionally guarded. Their relationship unfolded in a world where cameras never fully turned off. Diane once hinted that loving another actor at the same stage of vulnerability created both closeness and competition. Fame at a young age doesn't leave room for ordinary mistakes. Every argument feels amplified. Every insecurity grows louder. In retrospect, she has spoken about how difficult it was to separate personal identity from public image during those years. Their romance lasted several years, long enough to feel foundational. But as both careers expanded, so did the pressure. By the mid-1980s, they quietly parted ways. There was no scandal, just youth outgrowing itself. Looking back, Diane has acknowledged that some relationships exist to teach you about timing. With Matt, it was about discovering who she was becoming. He represented passion and possibility, but also the realization that two young stars trying to build separate empires often struggle to build one shared life. For Diane Lane, Matt Dillon was not just a boyfriend. He was the mirror of her early adulthood, and sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that arrive before you fully understand what you're losing. Chapter 3. Kevin Costner. When Diane Lane reunited with Kevin Costner, it was not the beginning of a tabloid romance. It was something quieter, and perhaps more powerful. They first crossed paths professionally years earlier, but it was Man of Steel, 2013, that placed them side by side as Martha and Jonathan Kent. Audiences over 50 immediately recognized something rare in their performances. Comfort, familiarity, the kind of unspoken rhythm that only comes when two seasoned actors trust each other completely. Later, in Let Him Go, 2020, that connection deepened. This time, they portrayed a grieving couple willing to risk everything for family. Diane spoke in interviews about the emotional weight of that film, describing Kevin as a steady presence, an actor who listens before he speaks, who understands silence as much as dialogue. She praised his patience between takes, his grounded energy on set. Kevin, in turn, called her fearless and instinctive. There has never been verified evidence of a romantic relationship between them, but that's precisely what makes this chapter meaningful. Not all men who leave an imprint do so through romance. Some enter your life at a stage when you no longer crave fireworks. You crave understanding. By the time they worked together again, Diane had lived through public heartbreak, divorce, motherhood, and reinvention. Kevin had endured his own career peaks and personal complexities. They met not as dreamers, but as veterans. Their chemistry felt mature, weathered, real. In interviews, Diane has often reflected that love evolves with age. It becomes less about intensity and more about loyalty, about who stands beside you when the cameras stop rolling. Kevin Costner represented that era for her. Not a scandal, not a secret affair, but a quiet partnership that reminded her how powerful steadiness can be, and how sometimes the deepest connections are the ones built on respect rather than romance. Chapter 4. Josh Brolin. When Diane Lane married Josh Brolin in 2004, she believed she was stepping into a second chance at lasting love. They met in 2002 at a birthday party, introduced by mutual friends. Both were older. Both carried scars. Diane had already lived through one marriage and several public relationships. Josh was rebuilding his life after personal struggles and a career that had not yet reached its later resurgence. In interviews, Diane described their early connection as electric but grounded, two adults choosing each other with intention. Their courtship moved quickly. By 2004, they were husband and wife. For a time, they appeared steady. Diane spoke warmly about Josh's humor and intensity. Friends described them as deeply affectionate. But marriage, especially in Hollywood, rarely unfolds without pressure. In December 2004, headlines exploded when Brolin was arrested following a domestic dispute. The charges were later dropped, and Diane publicly minimized the incident, calling it a misunderstanding. Still, the event lingered in public memory. In later reflections, Diane rarely discussed details, but she acknowledged in interviews that relationships require forgiveness, and sometimes endurance beyond what outsiders can see. Over the next several years, Brolin's career surged with films like No Country for Old Men and Milk. As his profile grew, so did the strain of two demanding careers moving at different speeds. By 2013, they quietly separated. The divorce was finalized later that year. Diane has never spoken bitterly about Josh. Instead, she has framed that chapter as one of growth, of learning what strength truly means. In interviews with the New York Times, she hinted that love sometimes teaches you boundaries you didn't know you needed. Josh Brolin was not her first love, But he was the love that forced her to redefine herself. And sometimes, the relationships you cannot get over are the ones that change the architecture of your heart forever. Chapter 5. Richard Gere. When Diane Lane stood opposite Richard Gere in Unfaithful, 2002, something shifted, not just in her career, but in how audiences saw her. The film, directed by Diane Lane, was daring for its time. Diane played a suburban wife, entangled in a dangerous affair, while Gere portrayed her betrayed husband. The tension between them was not loud. It was suffocating. Every glance carried weight. Every silence felt like confession. It earned Diane an Academy Award nomination, and she later admitted the role demanded emotional exposure unlike anything she had experienced before. In interviews promoting the film, Diane spoke candidly about trust. She said working with Gere required vulnerability, the willingness to let scenes breathe without forcing them. Gere, already an established star known for romantic dramas like An Officer and a Gentleman and Pretty Woman, approached the material with restraint. That balance created something unforgettable. There has never been confirmed evidence of a real-life romance between them, but the intimacy on screen blurred lines for many viewers. For older audiences especially, their performances felt painfully authentic, like watching a marriage fracture in real time. Years later, Diane reflected on how Unfaithful changed her. She described it as a turning point, saying in interviews that it forced her to confront aspects of longing, desire, and consequence within herself. Gere, she noted, was a generous scene partner, never overpowering, always attentive. Sometimes the men who linger in memory are not lovers behind closed doors, but collaborators who unlock something inside you. Richard Gere represented awakening, not romance, not scandal, but the moment Diane Lane stepped fully into her power as a woman unafraid to portray complexity. And perhaps that is why his presence in her story remains impossible to forget, because through him, she revealed parts of herself the world had never seen before. Chapter 6. Tom Cruise. Long before the awards, before the marriages, before the heartbreak that would quietly mature her, there was a brief, almost whispered chapter in Diane Lane's life involving Tom Cruise. It was the early 1980s. Hollywood was shifting. A new generation was rising. Diane was already an established young actress, respected for her work in A Little Romance and The Outsiders. Tom was just beginning his ascent after films like Risky Business. They moved in overlapping circles. Young, ambitious, constantly watched. In later interviews, Diane acknowledged that she and Cruise dated briefly during that era. It was never a long-term relationship. No public declarations, no dramatic breakup, just two young actors navigating sudden fame while trying to understand themselves. What makes this chapter unexpected is not scandal, but timing. Diane has reflected over the years about how youth shapes love. At that age, she once implied, "You're not choosing forever. You're choosing possibility." Cruise was focused, driven, intensely career-oriented even then. Those who worked with him described laser-like ambition. Diane, meanwhile, was still discovering what kind of life she wanted beyond the camera. Their paths diverged quickly. Tom's superstardom exploded. Diane stepped back at times, recalibrating after early career pressures. Looking back, she has spoken about how some relationships exist, almost like crossroads, moments where you glimpse an alternate future, then walk another direction. There has never been bitterness in her words about him, only distance, perspective. Tom Cruise was not her longest love, not her deepest heartbreak, but perhaps the most symbolic, because sometimes the person you cannot get over is the one who reminds you of who you were before the world decided who you would become. And in that fleeting chapter, Diane Lane was still becoming herself. 6 men, 6 different seasons of a life lived under the unforgiving light of Hollywood. From youthful passion with Christopher Lambert, to the mirror of early fame with Matt Dillon. From the steady maturity shared with Kevin Costner, to the painful lessons of marriage with Josh Brolin. From the artistic awakening beside Richard Gere to the brief symbolic crossroads with Tom Cruise, each man marked a chapter. Not all were forever, not all were easy, but every one of them helped shape the woman Diane Lane became, an actress of quiet strength, layered emotion, and enduring grace. At 61, perhaps the truth is not about who she couldn't get over, but about how love, in all its forms, leaves fingerprints on legacy. Now I'd like to ask you, which of these chapters do you believe changed her the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you cherish timeless Hollywood stories, don't forget to subscribe to Legendary Archives.